Because I don't want it to be. I know you have other things to talk about tonight, and there's other speakers as well. So we'll see how that goes. So I'm going to basically talk about the movement. I just want to fill you in on a little details about my own experience in the business. In front of the human sexuality classes, I gave a big spiel. But, I want you to know basically that I started doing sex work when I was about 28 years old, and I had been through graduate school, and what led me to it was really, I was a hippie. And it was just, the time of the sexual revolution, and I identified as an artist, and I was really trying to live outside social norms. I really didn't want to be a prostitute. I certainly was sensitive to the stigma. And after being a hippie, I was a feminist. And as a feminist, I learned that this could be a kind of a capitulation to the patriarchy. I was really trying to avoid this. Although, the truth is, and candidly, I did have some curiosity and, some fantasies. But I didn't think I was supposed to live my life by my fantasies. I mean, I knew that much. But basically, trying to live outside the social norms and being a hippie, you're going to run out of money, to put it bluntly. I needed the money. You know that, remember when Gloria Steinem went to be a Playboy bunny and then wrote an expose about Playboy? People know about that? She went to work for them and she trashed them. I thought, well, look, if Gloria Steinem could do that, I really did see myself as some sort of investigator. So, needing the money, wanting to investigate, being a writer, I had finished graduate school in creative writing. I did it. I just did it. I had a little desperation mixed in there. It was just one of those times at 28 years old. So I went down to a massage parlor. And the reason I went there is I knew they were selling sex. It was kind of sleazy, right? And they were not selling ambiance. It was like very close to the street. So I went to the massage parlor and, right away I saw that there was a real disparity between my images, between the stereotype of sex workers, or prostitutes, they didn't have sex workers yet, between the stereotype of prostitutes and the women I was meeting. So I was meeting women from all over the world, mostly from Korea and Vietnam in this parlor, and Mexico. And they were strong women, very buoyant, feisty. They had a lot of pride, and these were not the women I expected to meet. So right away I said to myself, there's information here. I need to be here. I need to talk to these women and understand what this life is for them. I need to learn myself. My interest was in sexual politics. As an artist, as a feminist, sexual adventurous, whatever. So really, for me, it was like I started this and I knew that this was going to be the center of my life's work. And going around talking as an activist, I kind of like to remind people in some way I have a kind of unique situation in that I was there at the beginning. So a lot of my motivations and my intensity is unique, but I just have to say I meet so many strong sex workers. It's odd in this movement. Like, there's a lot of women with PhDs who have an expertise in sex work, and they're like all in the closet. They're sex workers. Like, all my friends who have PhDs who are in the sex worker movement are prostitutes, and they can't even tell anybody. So I think it's very interesting. There's a new breed of young activists who are very brilliant, very educated, and very strong, who are working on this issue, and this is just so very new, and there's so many new developments. This movement started in 1973, so that's how I'm going to take you through this history and maybe do some of it sitting down. That is, in 1973, Coyote started in the United States, and at the same time, I think maybe a year or two prior to that, there was a sit-in in Lyon. It's in a church in Lyon, a prostitute strike for prostitutes' rights in France. And that inaugurated the sex worker rights movement. So activists from the United States, Margot St. James, Iris De La Cruz from Pony, Valerie Scott from Canada. There was maybe about like 4 or 5 of these kind of very similar libertine, intellectual, ex-hippie, international type of, women who were also very connected to human rights activism. Very connected to the academy, but not necessarily academicians. Usually prostitutes. And also Brazil, in many cities, little movements started. As you see here, this is an example of as a collage really, but from Coyote Howls was the name of our newspaper. Priscilla Alexander is a lesbian activist, and she was worked in tandem. She was not a prostitute. And from the very beginning of our movement, there was a very strong alliance between LGBT, which I guess they didn't even call it that then, and the sex worker rights movement. Priscilla Alexander was really worked side by side with Margot and brought to us, it formed our movement with the agenda of lesbian and gay rights. So our history was quite in tandem. In Canada, at the same time, there's a woman named Trish Birchall, who was a great activist who informed the movement. And in Canada, prostitution is slightly more legal than the United States. And male prostitutes were also involved. So there were a lot of gay male prostitutes informing the movement in Canada. It was less common, but it had a great influence. Priscilla Alexander worked as a labor activist as well. One of the things she says here in this poster on the bottom left, she says the right to be a prostitute is as important as the right not to be one. It is essentially the right to set the terms of one's sexuality, plus the right to earn a good living. I think that's interesting, because we always are talking about women's right not to do prostitution, which has a lot of meaning and importance. There's an idea that we certainly shouldn't be forced economically, forced for various reasons, certainly forced, period, and trafficking, to engage in prostitution. But to actually say that the right to actually do it is on par with that right, that is quite a bold move. And something certainly that resonates, and something that is still hard to get people to understand. Because people always want to, in this kind of international fight between prostitutes, rights activists, and anti-prostitution abolitionists, that is one of the central issues. Although I marked the beginning of the sex workers' rights movement, of course, in the early 70s, we know that the decriminalization, as framed by abolitionists, was something that started, I guess, the 1950s in the UN Declaration, that was submitted by Eleanor Roosevelt, but I don't think we signed on to it. And that declaration established the primary type of regulation for prostitution around the world, which is an abolitionist model actually based on decriminalization of prostitution per se, of the prostitute, and criminalization of pimping, of everything that you have to do to have a business in prostitution. So the only thing that's legal is doing it as a prostitute. And that model was instituted in France and many countries around the world. In the United States, that isn't our model. We have a prohibitionist model based on complete criminalization. But actually, essentially, the abolitionist model turns out to be pretty much just as oppressive. Because although they say they allow some prostitution in France, most of the things you actually need to do prostitution are illegal. So basically, this abolitionist model is very similar to any kind of prohibitionist model. So the articulation of prostitutes' rights in our country, in Canada, and in Europe was very similar, although there were a lot of differences in the legal system.